Hello, everyone, and welcome to our President's Program. I'm Shauntee Burns-Simpson, the current president of this amazing organization, the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. BCALA is a 50-year-old organization with the mission to serve as an advocate for the development, promotion, and improvement of library services and resources to the nation's African-American community, and provides leadership for the recruitment and professional development of African-American librarians. We are thrilled to have a follow-up discussion with Emily Knox and Jarrett Dapier. But before we start, we have a special guest here, Tamika D. Mallory. Tamika D. Mallory will be here to tell us a little bit about her book that just launched today. Ms. Mallory is a trailblazing social justice leader, movement strategist, globally recognized civil rights activist, co-founder of Untitled Freedom and the Historic Women's March, and author of State of Emergency. She served as the youngest ever executive director of the National Action Network. Her speech in the wake of the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, entitled State of Emergency, was dubbed the speech of a generation by ABC News. Mallory is an expert in the areas of gun violence prevention, criminal justice reform, and grassroots organizing. She looks forward to speaking to all of you today. We are really, really happy again to have Emily Knox and Jarrett Dapier to do their follow-up discussion on when not to call the cops. Apologies. Emily Knox is an interim associate dean for academic affairs and associate professor in the School of Information Sciences at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Her book Banning in 21st Century America, is the first monograph in the Beta Phi Mu Scholar Series. She serves on the boards of Beta Phi Mu and the National Coalition Against Censorship. Jarrett Dapier is a young adult librarian at Skokie Public Library, just outside Chicago, Illinois. He has written about policing and libraries for American Libraries and Library Journal, and in 2019 was named a Library Journal Mover and Shaker for his work producing theater with teens. Also a children's book author, his debut picture book, Jazz for Lunch, will be released by Simon & Schuster on September 7th of this year, 2021. Thank you to everyone joining, and we look forward to this wonderful presentation. Welcome, Tamika D. Mallory.
Uh-oh, there we are. You would think after all this time I would know to unmute, right? Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
So please tell us a little bit about State of Emergency before we start our program.
Well, thank you so much for having me to be on today and for accommodating me to come and talk about State of Emergency. It is a book that's truly a labor of love, and it really has come from a lot of pain that I think many of us have been feeling in our society, where we look for justice, we look for peace, we look for equity, we look for all people to be living in peace, and to know that the color of our skin will not be a determining factor for harm. And, I wrote the book immediately following George Floyd's murder. Ironically, I sat with his family just a few weeks ago when they heard the Derek Chauvin verdict. I sat with them for several days as they had such an anxiety, not knowing whether or not they would receive a form of accountability And it really made me think about this journey of the last year where I've been writing and hoping to encourage more people to join this cause and to really understand that we are all in this fight together. There is no one community, no one race, no one group of people in any way, shape, or form that can fight alone and that can accomplish and achieve what we need alone. It is going to take lots of people working together. And in state of emergency, I talk about some of those strategies. And I also talk about the difference between being an ally, which is good, but it's better to be an accomplice, which is someone who chooses to make sacrifices on behalf of the movement and on behalf of people who need it. And so that's what state of emergency is all about. There's some really critical moments that happen in the book, and hopefully you all will have an opportunity to read it and to really share your feedback.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, you're actually opening up the program about us talking about policing in the library. And so we thought it would be great for you to be here to just talk about your book. And we are really excited to have you be part of our national conference that's happening later on in the summer. So I do want to let everyone know that's watching that you will be one of the speakers at our national conference being held virtually. So if everybody here can please go to ncal.org to sign up. We are so proud to have you, Ms. Tamika D. Mallory, to be part of our presenters for the conference. And we are so supportive of the amazing work that you are doing. We are really thrilled to have all of these allies / accomplices watching you. And we are looking forward to purchasing your book. Is there anything else you would like us to know? How we could purchase it, how folks can get you to speak at their libraries? Is there anything while you're here before you go?
So I am on a virtual tour that actually begins tonight, and it goes throughout the rest of the month. That's the first leg of the tour, that is the virtual component. And then beginning in June, we're going to be out on street corners across the country, signing books and having conversations. But during this month, we have an incredible lineup of individuals who are joining us. Taraji P. Henson, Charlemagne the God, and others will be right tonight. They'll be on the first tour stop, if you will, and we're categorizing them by cities and states based upon the local bookstores that we're working with. And so folks can go to TamikaDMallory.com. That's TamikaDMallory.com, and you can, click the link and purchase tickets to get a book. A lot of the books have already been signed. I think the first 150 books that are going out have already been signed personally by me. And they're going to be conversations with other individuals like Tiffany Haddish, Kendrick Sampson, and others that will be on the tour. And you guys, I hope you'll be a part of it. Because it's virtual, you can attend any of the dates that you wish. And the only thing I would say, if you just give me this quick moment, is that I wanted this book to be something for everyone. I wanted to make sure that Ray on a street corner, or a dentist, or a mother in the church, that all of us would be able to come together and read this material and feel like we can own it. And my virtual tour is going to be a mixture of the same activists, street organizers, and also some incredible leaders, thought leaders like Michael Eric Dyson. And I hope that you all will come, participate, be a part of the conversation. And let's do the second part. We do the protest very, very well. And then we also, and you all know all too well, that there's also study that has to be done and information that needs to be passed down to our children. So thanks again for having me. I'm excited to be a part of the conference. Can't wait. And anything that anyone would like to speak with me about so that we can build together, I'm available. TamikaDMallory.com, and of course on all social media platforms.
Thank you so much. We will be sharing your social media in the chat. And you already let one of the cats out the bag. We will have Michael Eric Dyson part of the national conference as well. So again, thank you so much. We will be supporting your book for all the librarians out there. You could purchase it from Simon & Schuster. So buy a bunch. We want the community to be reading it. Thank you again. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Okay, Emily and Jarrett. take it away.
Thank you so much. Hi, Emily.
Oh,
And hi to everybody. I don't know how many of you were here for our first event in March. So if you are returning, welcome back. And if this is your first time joining us to talk about this topic, welcome for the first time. The reason we are holding this is because when Emily and I spoke on policing, Black Lives Matter and libraries in March to address the urgent concerns of police presence in libraries and how to avoid it, and just the many problems surrounding that issue. And the event was attended by over 500 people, and Emily and I spoke for an hour, and we covered a lot of ground. However, maybe got to 2 or 3 questions in the chat. And as I was signing off, noticed that there were probably 75 to 80 comments in the chat that we didn't get to, and many of them very compelling questions, very important questions. So we proposed to the Black Caucus of ALA that this be an ongoing series, because clearly we're just scratching the surface. Clearly there's a lot to work through, and clearly there's a lot of there are a lot of concepts and subjects that need to be introduced, just basically introduced into discussions about libraries and their place in society, and what kind of services they offer and what kind of space they offer. And so this is part of that hopefully ongoing series. And so Emily and I, we basically went back to the chat from the first event and found a few questions that we thought we could sort of kick off the conversation with, just to address them, because we didn't during the first time. But please feel free, as the folks in the first event were, to ask questions in the chat, and hopefully we can turn in a few minutes to the chat instead of waiting to the last 5 minutes. And yeah, Emily and I talked yesterday, and we wanted to emphasize that we're not experts. We don't have necessarily the solutions to a lot of these very complicated questions. We just want to begin the discussion, kickstart the discussion, and absolutely welcome if there's some question that we are stumped on, or you have a different idea about whatsoever, please throw that in the chat, because we learn from it as well as everybody else who's attending here. Everybody's got different experiences and different work situations, and we want to hear about those and what you've learned. So that said, Emily, the first question that I noted from the chat last time that I wanted to go over was, so we talked about a couple concepts that were in an article that Emily and I wrote, and but one of the main concepts that came out of our previous discussion was the concept of viewing police and calling police to the library, viewing it in very stark terms, which is you are calling for armed backup for your situation in the library. And we found that to be a pretty stark reminder that, as somebody put in the chat in March, as soon as you call the police to the library is no longer in control of the situation. That's it. And that, I thought, was a perfect comment, and because it's absolutely true. Emily, I don't know if you want to talk about, just remind, for those who didn't attend the March group, some of the comments that you made, and continue to feel about, like, what are police good for when you bring them to the library, generally, not as an existential concept, but what are they good for when you bring them to the library?
So I think one thing to think about when we think about policing in the United States is really that the police are a very blunt instrument, and actually an instrument with very few tactics and strategies that can be used. So if you call the police in any situation, somebody who is armed will come, and what can they do? Some police are trained in de-escalation tactics, but many are not. But what they can actually do usually is arrest somebody. That's the main thing they can do. They can arrest you, they can cite you. And so what I've been thinking about a lot is that the actual intervention that we are looking for when there are problems. It's just something, one thing we talked about yesterday was really thinking about what is the outcome that we are striving for when something happens in the library, right? And is calling the police going to lead to that outcome? Sometimes it might, honestly, but will it in most situations? And one thing we discussed was thinking through crises before they start. So what happens a lot of times is you're already in the situation, and the way that our society is set up is that there is the blunt instrument of basically the police to call, right? In all sorts of situations. I mean, I know there's 311, but how do you call a social worker? How do you do that? There's no like number to like get somebody to guarantee that somebody who is trained in de-escalation techniques, for example, will show up in a crisis. There's no way to make sure that that happens. And I think that's really what we will need to think about, what we need to think about when we think about calling the police is like, what is the police? The police is a paramilitary armed organization. Is that what you need in whatever situation might be happening? And just to think about that before something happens. So I'm really involved in this conversation because I love thinking about policy. That's one of my favorite things is practical policies. So these don't necessarily have to be written policies, but making sure that you talk things through in your institutions before they happen. What will we do in a situation? I think is just really important.
Yeah, so one of our attendees said, we're having the same exact discussion in our library. What group is there to reach out to regarding this issue? There really is not one. So maybe it's up to us to make one. There's certainly not one for libraries and policing or community spaces and policing, not that I know of. But that's a great point. I mean, I think these conversations are part of creating that group and trying to solve problems and coming together to have these discussions. Emily, I just want to highlight absolutely this concept of preventive work. Preventive work means that you as a librarian and hopefully your institution, though I know that's an entire can of worms that I know is an obstacle towards progress and reform, is that preventive work requires that you as an organization or you as a librarian, if you're trying to do it on your own, prioritize thinking about police work, prioritize thinking about police presence in the libraries, prioritize thinking through situations before they happen. Because last time we talked a lot about people who are in crisis in the middle of the library and then not knowing what to do. So the idea being, not even dreaming up, but thinking up situations that are likely to happen given your community, given the violence of our country, given the uncertainties of every day. And we can draw on these things from our own experiences as librarians and just things that have happened in the library, working through them. And one thing that has helped at Skokie Public Library from young adult teen services perspective is we have a daily meeting with safety staff, and safety means security. They've sort of rebranded as safety, but they did that intentionally because our safety staff are all folks who have worked in mental health care, special education, and unhoused and homelessness issues, and in shelters. And so all of them are really schooled in care and empathy and de-escalation. And so we have meetings with them to always review what might have happened the day before, and how it could have gone better, but also what we might expect today if a certain individual that there might have been a problem with comes back today, and how we can more sensitively and respectfully handle that situation. So the daily meetings it's at like 2:45 before school lets out. We just talk through a lot of these issues with the safety staff, and usually a youth services librarian is there. But the preventive nature, and Emily and I also talked about this with confronting white nationalism in libraries. It has to be a priority before the thing happens. And I think, again, this discussion is part of that, but it also requires buy-in from the board and directors. And I know that's extremely tough for a lot of people on this call. One thing that emerged from the chat last time was it's clear that there is incredible disparities in budgeting. There's incredible disparities in support from administration for a lot of librarians. Being here, I think, shows that you care. But those are more institutional problems, and we can talk about that. But the preventive work is key. But we talked a little bit about creative partnerships, and I see in the chat there's a lot of so someone said Philadelphia has a new conflict mediating app. Not sure how it can apply to libraries, but thanks for sharing that resource, how to prevent gun violence. And then, can you speak to library workers and community members organizing for police abolition in libraries like SAFE, LAPL, Cop Free NYC, and Libraries for All STL, and others? Emily, have you read up on, because I know Teen Vogue covered the LAPL police abolition in libraries.
No, I have not been able to read up on some of the movements. I'm happy to see them.
Yeah.
I often wonder though, so what I get concerned about, and I'm going to be super blunt about this, is when there are groups that are talking about police abolition, are they involving the people who actually need to be at the table for those discussions? So I am often worried that they are preaching to the choir. I will just be completely honest with you. And they are not involving the people who actually need to be persuaded to get on board. So I'm happy to see that these various things happen, but it's just very, are your directors there? Are there people who worry about safe neighborhoods, right? Are they at these meetings? Who are you talking to at these meetings? I think that is often a step that is not something that actually doing the communication and the actual persuasive work to get the community on board is quite hard. I'd actually like to give an example for this. So this didn't happen at a library, but it happened at a makerspace that I'm part of. I'm a key member with Makerspace Urbana. This kid came in one day. We have a donation jar. We were actually all in there, and this kid came in and stole the money from the donation jar. It was really quite bold, honestly, because we were just all sitting there. And someone called the police. One of our members called the police on the kid. Now, most of us are not police callers that were in that room. And in fact, what we had to do was talk to the person who had called the police about why calling the police was not the right response to the kid stealing our donations. And this was actually much harder than it might seem like it'd be at first, because the person was very focused on the theft, right? Something was stolen. What else do you do besides call the police when someone steals something? In some ways, we had to tell him that it doesn't matter. It's really okay, right? That's not the right response. Because if the police had ever found the kid, which they hadn't, that kid would have been in so much trouble over $100, right? And having that conversation, actually saying we don't call the police in these sorts of situations, especially for something like theft, that's hard. But we had to decide that the kids' own safety was more important than us losing $100. Yes. And that is a really hard conversation to have with people, to say what matters more. And also, you know, it's not necessarily true that you never call the police. Like, that's not always the truth. It was that this was a property crime as opposed to a crime against a person, which might be a place where you do call the police for some reason. So thinking through those ideas very carefully, I think is important.
This is an enormous hurdle, and I love that example because I love thinking through strategies or trying to generate strategies for how to convince people who are steeped in what the police are for and property rights, and that those things are more important than the lives of people. And white people are incredibly invested in this idea of there are certain standards, and they have not reflected on or examined or thought through. There are certain standards, and when they're violated, that is absolutely police, and there's no other thought about it. So $100 taken from a donation thing, it doesn't cross the mind about the life of the 13-year-old or however old he was. And we talked yesterday about drug dealing in the library. There's a lot of people who would be horrified at the idea that you don't call the police for that, that there's another solution. And it might be a non-starter for a lot of people, but we have to generate strategies. And I don't mean to say we need to compromise or we need to generate strategies for, you know, how to water down what needs to happen so it's more comfortable for white people. That's absolutely not the case. It's that we need to approach from a mindset of like, where are they and what will be convincing? And I have this, I'm dropping this here because it's a 538 roundup of polls that show that since last June, support for the Black Lives Matter movement has fallen while America's trust in law enforcement has risen. So while there was a brief period of Americans saying that, yeah, we need to reform, and yeah, the police are out of control, now it's 69% of Americans now trust local police and law enforcement to promote justice and equal treatment of all races. Not surprisingly, the main group that raises that number exponentially is white men. Of course, that is their point of view. And at the same time, we have the Chauvin verdict, and suddenly a new poll suggests a majority of voters see an urgent need for police reform. So there are these waves, and I don't know, I mean, I was horrified to see that a year later, support for Black Lives Matter has plummeted and support for police and local law enforcement has risen. So we're up against a lot when it comes to just saying, don't call the police. A lot. And I think we have to be cognizant, conscious, like acknowledge it, because we'll just run into a brick wall. And I'm afraid of that. So yeah,
I wanted to talk about what
yeah,
this last question that Tiffany has. It's actually a statement about the police showing up when emergency services are called. So I think this is really a place, one thing we also discussed was advocacy. So thinking through the policies, why does that happen? That's not just something that just happens. Someone has put a policy somewhere that if someone calls for an ambulance, the police need to show up. That doesn't have to be that way. You know, we can think of who do we talk to that is it the city council? I actually don't know who made that policy. It might be like, that's how we always did it and that's how we keep doing it, which is often true with policy. Although I will say that I saw the ambulance come right outside my house yesterday. The fire department showed up, but the police did not show up. So perhaps something has changed here. I'm in Champaign, Illinois, so that the police do not automatically show up when you call for an ambulance. So I think that's incumbent on us, right, as people who work in service, right, to think through, well, what can I do, you know, as a member of my community to see what those actual policies are for who shows up when. And that's something that I think the library community should really be thinking about. You know, this is the work that, you know, especially directors and, you know, perhaps some of your patrons who have very loud voices in the library. Are you talking to the city council members? Are you talking to the chief of police, right? To see where these ideas come from that, you know, you call an EMT, the police show up. That's totally unnecessary and probably is just the way it's always been done.
yeah, I think that's true. And also I would recommend, although police are touchy about this, of course, because it depends on who produces the documents, but you are welcome to FOIA the police department to find out what training manuals are their new police officers looking at, what recommendations for what situations are they trained in. Some departments are probably covered by local laws that somehow make it you know, private or confidential, but use the power as a citizen or a person who works in that town to investigate, to find out, like, what is the actual situation here? I remember when I was little, my dad always said, oh, check it out. Look, wherever the fire engine goes, the ambulance goes. And wherever the ambulance goes, the fire engine goes. They help each other out. And I absolutely recently started noticing the cops are always there. I swear they weren't there 30 years ago. But I don't know, it's probably different from town to town. But you know, this speaks to the growing paramilitarization and the growing belief in state control from paramilitary actors that are often police. And do we want that in our libraries? So there was a lot of questions, and I'll just go through a couple. One was, how can we support patrons experiencing substance abuse and or mental health concerns when working in an area where organizations and resources are available but completely overwhelmed, so they can't help due to how many people need services? And that was an ongoing question, like, there's just no services. And I think there are two things, and Emily, I'll let you chime in for sure. One of them is I think there's more out there than we realize. So one agency citywide might be overwhelmed, but if you're in a big city, there might be a lot of places that are doing community organizing work, mental health activism. There might be a lot out there where you can get expertise and help from them and learn how to solve these problems. Again, prevention-wise, before they happen, before there's a crisis, you know. And I'm curious about this, and I don't know if anybody here has any experience. I was going to call someone from Narcotics Anonymous to ask, you know, what would you recommend we do? Because we don't want to call the police about somebody who, you know, is clearly experiencing an addiction and using our space, and maybe this isn't the best place for that. And this goes to larger issues. The libraries have been expected in the last 15 years, which feels like 15 minutes, to be all things, as mental health services have been cut, as schools have been closed, as services citywide have been cut. I mean, even in Chicago here, what was Rahm Emanuel's almost first act? It was close all the city mental health providers on the south side. And then people are shocked that the libraries and librarians are expected to have all the answers and treat people that they're not qualified to help out. So that leads to, we need to pressure our admins and boards. We just need to be louder, that we need social workers. We need empathetic, unarmed safety staff with social work or crisis training and experience. And we need trainings, especially those of us who have no support whatsoever. It was clear from that chat last time that there are people left on their own in a building alone at night, without any trainings whatsoever, without any safety staff, all across this country. It's just unacceptable. I mean, we can't be left alone. Like, we can't have no backup, and we can't have the only option be, let's call the dudes with like firearms and, an itchy trigger finger. It's just not okay. So I don't know. I feel like, I don't know if this is an issue for ALA wider, but like, our admins and boards need to hear from us, because we're put under a lot. Emily.
Yeah, I mean, I think what libraries have been asked to do. So I'll just tell you, when I teach my students, I haven't taught recently this course, but Libraries of Information Society. And I talk about the library being a place, one of the few places that is open to everybody. There just are not many places that are in a building that are like the library, a public library. And this means that the library has had to take on a lot of services. So I know you all know this during the pandemic, what you've been asked to do, and then not receiving additional support and funding for that work. And I really do believe that these are all together. People need training, people need support. And you can only get that if you advocate for it. So thinking about what is needed in your own community to provide this support that you need, the de-escalation training that you need, the bystander intervention training that you need. That's really the only way it will become, and letting people know the amount of work that has been put on libraries to provide services, lunch for people, all sorts of things that people just are not aware that the library is doing. It's really amazing to me how unaware people are of the work that libraries do. Someone had a question here about police preventing crime. So
Yeah, I saw that.
One thing I've talked to Jarrett a lot about is about the police being late. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but in many ways I mean it. The police are often showing up afterwards. I'm not talking about things like the SWAT team showing up in a hostage situation. I mean, the kid had already stolen the money. They were gone. Having the police come and fill out a report so that we could barely describe this kid is not doing anything. It's not getting our $100 back. It's not helping the kid. It's not helping us. So it's often that the police show up when something has already happened. It is not usually in a crisis situation. The crisis is actually abated when the police have shown up. And so if you think about, this isn't always true, but it is a way of thinking about what are we calling on the police to do, right? Often the thing has already taken place. And it's really that we are calling on the police to punish afterwards. So, and of course, the punishments that we have are rarely, restorative, right? They are punitive. So if they had found that kid, they would have arrested him, put him in juvenile hall. We would not have seen our $100, right? Would he have learned anything about perhaps using his daring skills in a different way than to steal from get money that wasn't his, right? I think these are just ways of thinking about what could be different, because what we would have wanted was to sit and talk to the kid about maybe how that wasn't the right choice. Why did he feel that he needed to steal that day? Was he having trouble getting food? We just don't know. And putting him in juvenile detention would not have given us those answers, would not have helped the kid. And actually, they would never have found him anyway. That wasn't going to happen. So what would be the point? What was even the point of calling the police then?
Yeah.
So we could fill a report? Okay.
Great, but you put someone away. The thing is too, and this speaks to something that was mentioned last time I wanted to touch on, is people ask about, well, what about coffee with a cop programs? We host those at my library. And what about cops coming in who are like the young adult officers who come in to just hang with the teens at the library? Number one, I think if you want the teens to stop coming, do that. But also, somebody noted, and I think this is very salient, this is from their chat. I've known police when I did work building alternatives in the juvenile justice system who acknowledged to her that these relationship building strategies, coffee with a cop, coming in to hang with the teens, were used to both increase compliance when they encountered the youth out in the city, and to increase access to intelligence. And so if someone had called at Urbana, hey, this kid took $100, whoever the responding officer is, what if they only hear the race? And then they've also done coffee with a cop or done some kind of like in the schools initiative, and then they know they've developed an opinion of this one kid. Then they go looking for that kid because it was probably him, is what they would think. And I mean, the whole system, I don't think it's a good idea to like include them. But then someone said, well, what about cops who come in to like get their holds, like they're library patrons, and they park in the parking lot outside sometimes at Skokie because the village hall is there, and so they're just around all the time. And I was thinking a lot of people will scoff at this, but I think you have to put it out there in order to make the change begin to even be on people's minds. What if cops couldn't come in the library if they were armed? I mean, I know a lot of police departments would be like, then we're never coming there. But we've got a big, no guns sticker on the front door of our library, but cops can bring them, I guess. Why? Why is that okay? I hate guns and I hate gun violence, and my life has been changed deeply by it in several ways. And it really, really upsets me. And the whole idea of armed security, armed police is just unacceptable to me. Yeah.
There's a question about patrons calling the police or asking staff to call the police.
So one thing that we were thinking is this is an issue of messaging in a lot of ways. I think we need to do a better job letting patrons know, A, if we have safety staff that can handle situations. A lot of people don't even know those people exist. B, signage, communications in some way that says, is there a problem? Please come find staff, we're around. Basically letting people know there are people around. And this speaks to something that came up in the chat last time, which I want to mention, is be aware of who's in your library and what's going on. Not as a spy, not as somebody who's looking for trouble, but just somebody who's a presence. Because Skokie Public Library emphasizes roaming for young adult staff. We're moving all the time. Which I've also thought, you know, if I were a staff member with mobility problems, this would be a big problem, but that's a whole other issue. I'm always running into people in the stack saying hi, walking around, and am shocked sometimes when staff have no idea that something's going on in the corner. But that is an example, I think, too. It's a different sort of service model that I think prevents situations, not because you're like, aha, got you, but like more like, oh, what's going on? And before it gets to something, it can actually be handled. Rough housing was another question. You know, what am I supposed to do if they're rough housing? Do you know them? Do you have a relationship with them? Talk to them. If it's still a problem, you know, it's an ongoing issue. And again, this goes to, are you all alone? Do you know them? Have you built relationships? I still don't see why the police are who you call for like kids wrestling, even though it is really, it's a nuisance behavior. But we didn't even touch on implicit bias, which is a training. And I'm thankful so much for all the people in the chat who have been dropping trainings that they've attended and found helpful, because that was one of the main takeaways from the March session was, what do we do? What kind of trainings do you recommend? Where do we find this? So thank you to the people dropping these. And if you haven't seen, scroll back up and mark those links as places to investigate. I have a few that I'm going to drop too that we use at Skokie Library, but it's intervention or de-escalation training, implicit bias training. Also, we use a method in young adult services called I Escape, which can be used in all interactions, children, adults, and teens. And I'm going to drop a link to that because it's really hard to find online in a concise way, but I found it really helpful. All of us have, so I'm going to put that in there. But Emily, talking about a implicit bias again, can you talk about the idea of like, well, who gets to be considered not dangerous and who is considered dangerous, and how do we change that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to realize that these are all kind of combined together. So if we use a term like rough housing, right? Who is rough housing? How do we, I'm going to use the word construct, the people who are rough housing? In our white supremacist culture, we have constructed Black and brown teens, especially boys, in a way where they are seen as being scary. There's no way of separating that from, you know, the violence that we see against Black and brown people in our world. And this is part of all of us, like we all swim in this together, right? The way that we see people. So in the first one, I talked about how Black children are often, when I say children, I mean babies, are suspended from preschool for being rowdy. It's because of how we look at Black people, even when they are 3 or 4 years old. And this just continues as they get older, as we get older, right? And so when you see kids, this is something you have to do yourself. You have to do it yourself and say, I see those teens over there. How am I looking at them? If they were a different color, would I look at them the same way? And it's all of us who have to do this. It's part of the world in which we live. So, you know, so we started talking about things like gun culture. It's hard to separate gun culture from our white supremacist culture, right? Like someone mentioned that the police don't carry guns in other countries. This is because our police were set up to police Black people. And it's just, you have to constantly think about, what have I learned? What have I absorbed by being in this culture. And it's difficult work. I guess I really want to stress that. And it's difficult to do when you are in the situation, which is why we are talking about training and thinking through these things and being aware of your own biases. It's just, so when I hear people say like teens, also, you know, you can see like it's teens, right? We don't talk about like adults roughhousing or juveniles, like children, youths roughhousing. There's something about teens. There's something about this particular age of children as being a little bit more out of control, right? That's really what we mean by that. And that they will just push things over the edge. And so are you seeing clearly when you see that happening? I just think that these are things that we all have to think about because of the world in which we live.
And that's why we named our article that we co-wrote "The Fog of Implicit Bias," because a lot of people, everyone has to do work to clear away that fog, but you can't do it just by going like, okay, I'm going to see clearly now. The messages and things that we have absorbed unconsciously create this fog, and it's ongoing work. It can't be like, all right, one training and we're done. So the sorry, I'm just reading the chat, and right, they're the ones showing up armed and unannounced. Me asking them why they are there because they're making my staff and patrons uncomfortable and scared is not. Exactly. And that's the thing. So we did talk about the patrons issue, calling the police. At Skokie Library, we've almost eradicated calling the police for teen issues in the last 2 years. The times that they have been called have either been adult staff, like adult services staff, who bring some of those ageist and racist ideas to viewing a situation. They're the ones who have called, and also patrons. And so, and then the other interesting thing, as Emily touched on, is, so while we are not calling we're not calling the police for teen issues, there are a lot of police calls for issues upstairs with adults. And that again a lot of times comes back to patrons, and sometimes comes to patrons who just call from where they are instead of trying to go find help. But again, that leads to issues about, you know, who feels safe in the library and who doesn't, and a lot of things we can't control. Meet them in the classroom or invite them to the library to talk about safety and policing. I really like that idea, Teresa. I think this should be an issue to talk about with teens. But also, somebody mentioned way earlier, what about talking with our own patrons about policing issues, having meetings about this? I do also really, you know, you talked about white supremacy and the violence of our culture. And it's like, I feel like the police paramilitarization increases gun violence, and gun violence increases paramilitarization. We're in this horrible dance of death that is just constant. And so, you know, a lot of people say well, in other countries, they're unarmed, the police are unarmed. True, most countries don't have more guns in the country than citizens, and we do. And a lot of police will say, do you have any idea how many people have pointed a gun at me? How many typical, you know, stops I've run into where a person, you know, reaches for a gun for real? So we're up against the violence of the culture, the violence of white supremacy, and these two things working in tandem to increase violent policing. But I think the more we talk about this, and I think patrons should be involved, but there's also a lot of questions in the chat about, Fog of Implicit Bias is the title, Marlene. Every situation is different. Let's see. Yeah, so I don't know. Sorry, I got distracted by the chat. We're trying to keep up with you because we don't want a situation like last time where we were like, there's a mile-long chat log that we didn't even talk about. Yeah, let me share some. So
People
I
asked about
asked,
the composition of the recruitment and training safety staff.
yeah. So that is a great question. I asked our staff trainer, which we have, and her job is really to train everybody and to provide ongoing trainings. Where did she get de-escalation training? Where did she get the training that she offered staff and continues to? So this was, I think, provided earlier, crisisprevention.com. And this institute is excellent. Their website is really good just to start gathering information. There's a lot of really good stuff. So I linked to top 10 de-escalation tips. However, in order to be able to train your own staff on de-escalation using their techniques, you have to train with them, and then you sort of get certified as a trainer, and it's very pricey. There are grants available. This again takes extra work. But to become a trainer, to be able to provide it for your library through crisis prevention, takes some training for you. And then I also asked young adult staff, which trainings have they found to be effective? So this is Luna Jimenez Institute, and these were provided to me by staff that work with young adults, so they're my colleagues. This is Unfiltering the Fury, which is an expensive training, but it's workshop for white managers on reducing racial harm. It was a hugely attended recently, so the presenter is providing a new an additional one on June 1st. That's what I just linked to. And then Hollaback, absolutely. That was you beat me to it. That was the other one I was going to do. Yeah, so I don't need to provide it because it's there. So Hollaback, absolutely. Like, just start diving into the Hollaback organization because there's so much good stuff there. And I know people have been going to a lot of trainings there. Emma says, have you ever tried telling a cop what to do? Yeah, that's a problem. So we have about 5 minutes, and I want to make sure we covered, I think we covered a lot. Implicit bias trainings, I would love it if people would drop any trainings they've been to they found very effective in that realm, because there's a lot out there. I get a little overwhelmed with like, well, who do I recommend? Because there's so much, but I know that some people find some much more effective than others, and sometimes diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings can still be rooted in whiteness in a way that's really disappointing, even though on the surface it seems really incisive or sort of like, yeah, this is the way. So I want to make sure we're recommending stuff that's like the best. There we go.
Yeah, I'm looking at Brian's statement about a sergeant coming to speak because a staff member spoke poorly to the officer.
Mm-hmm.
I really think this goes into how the community needs to push for better training of the police themselves. Police should not worry about how people are talking to them. Worrying about someone respecting you or not respecting you is not a position you should be in when you have the power of life and death over people. That's not something that we would want to see in people who we give essentially license to destroy people's lives, quite literally. whether or not people are deferring to their authority. To me, that really speaks to poor training. I think you should actually let people know, someone in the police, someone farther up in the police department know that that happened, because that's really unacceptable, I have to say, right? No one who has the amount of authority that a police officer has should be saying that someone spoke poorly. I mean, it's so childish, it's almost unbelievable, right? I'm going to tell my sergeant to go talk to someone in the library because a staff member in the library wasn't respecting me. Like, that's just not how a police officer should react to something. So I just wanted to put that in there.
Taylor said, yeah, it speaks to a petty, childish personality type reinforced by a deadly authoritarian system. Absolutely. And the reason I put recommendation to the book, Policing the Black Man, a series of essays edited by Angela Davis, not the same Angela Davis, it's a different Angela Davis, but that has essay after essay of the ways police use the concept of disrespect to criminalize Black teenagers. Just the slightest amount gives them liberty to do what they want to that person. And so I don't know how, I mean, this is huge.
Yeah, so I would say that, as the director of, if a police sergeant came and talked to me about that, I would let that person know that I was going to talk to their supervising officer about the fact that they came to me and even thought about discussing this. I think that's the sort of intervention that needs to happen, right? You need to use your own cultural capital and social capital to say, no, this is not acceptable. I do want to say something about why this is important. During the Derek Chauvin trial, I just was listening to NPR, and the person who was following the trial for them said, well, the police have killed at least one person a day during this trial. And actually, I was just looking it up. The New York Times actually found that it was an average of 3 people per day, half of whom are Black and brown. We do not hear about these. We only hear, if you are nearby. They don't all reach national media, but this is every day in this country. And you don't, as libraries, as people who are intended to serve and provide information to our communities, it's important not to be a part of that process. I guess that's really what we're trying to get at. And it's not easy to think about how things might be different. But I think it's important for libraries, all libraries, public, school, academic, to think about how things could be different. And what does it mean to provide a service role to your community? So I just thinking keeping those statistics in mind is really what we are thinking about. And of course, finding out more about what is happening in your own community with this is very important.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to end. We hope this was helpful, and I'm definitely gonna pull all of these links that people have put into the chat for my own research. I hope you all will too, and maybe we can develop something that, well, it sounds like there are people who have developed some lists and resources that we should go to first before we talk about, do we need to develop something new? Let's not repeat each other's work, please. the last bit that I dropped was just a recent Gallup poll from last August that said that, and it complicates matters when people think, oh, this is the way it is and this is what people of different races believe. This claims Black Americans want police to retain local presence, yet down in the body of the article, it says Black Americans, unsurprisingly, lack assurance police encounters will go well. So there is this contradiction between the desire for safety and peace and the fact that the police do not provide that. So this is libraries, and Tamika talked about this at the very beginning, not about libraries, just the world we want: justice, safety, and peace. And I would add freedom to be and to exist and survive. These are the things at stake. And I would also be curious if anybody wants to do this research about police shootings or just police violence in libraries, because I've never been able to find like a roundup or even a study or anything like that. I don't know if it's out there, but yeah, thank you very much, everybody. Any final thoughts, Emily, or how to contact or anything like that?
You're always welcome to contact me. I'm easy to find online. My Twitter is @EJMKnox.
And I'm jdapier@gmail.com if anyone has specific questions or additional thoughts.
Fantastic. Let me see if I can add that in the chat really quickly. Thank you again, Emily and Jarrett, for facilitating this conversation, because it is truly important. And again, go out and get State of Emergency by Tamika D. Mallory. Let's put your emails in this chat so everybody can email you. Have a great afternoon, everyone.